All right, welcome everybody to the Diagnostic Discussion After Dark. I think this is our first diagnostic discussion of the year. And Brian, we can see your entire screen not showing correctly.
Yeah, I know. It's good. We're good.
Okay.
It's a delay.
So welcome everybody. We've got two very special guests. Don't make fun of them, please. We want them to come back one day. So we got Pedro de la Torre and Matt Shanahan here. So I think they both have. Do you guys have a case study together, or is it separate?
Should be together.
Together, all right. And then I think Brian's got one as well. So are we leading with Brian's first?
No, Matt's gonna start us off.
Well, let's give away something first. We have nothing to give away this time, except for all the knowledge we can all accumulate together. So we have a 3-page pamphlet of everything we all know. It's a double-spaced college rule.
Written in really big letters?
Yeah. Sans serif 32 font.
I got a finger paint.
Yeah. So I think Pedro's going to kick us off. I think you got the first one going. So set us up. What are we working on?
It's a 2000. Actually, I think Matt is more familiar with this one. It's a 2005 Jeep, right, Matt?
08, I think. Yeah, let me pull it down.
There we go.
2008.
Here we go. You see it okay?
Yeah.
Is it full screen?
Oh, look at that.
Okay.
You're good.
Perfect.
Like when we're doing mobile work, we kind of get a variety of customers. You know, you get some that'll call you right away without even looking at the car. Some of them will put parts on stuff, and then you got some customers. You know, it's not gonna be a quick call because they're pretty knowledgeable people. You see them in training all the time. They got all the right tools and stuff, and that was the case on this one. Get their cars already torn apart, and no parts have been replaced yet, but it was beating up the customer pretty good. So this is the 08 Jeep. It's got the front control module as a gateway, and then it's got CAN C and then CAN B bus. And this one had a CAN B bus issue. And really the car itself was kind of, a lot of us have seen these Chryslers now. The headlights are doing their own thing. The instrument cluster is going crazy. Just random kind of issues with the vehicle. So one of the things that kind of threw us off, I've used these charts quite a bit, and it looked accurate to me because what made sense to me was when I looked at the regular CAN C, the voltages is what I would expect for dominant versus recessive bus. But now if you read some of the fine print, they're talking about multimeter testing, and that's what threw me off, and you'll see why in a little bit on when I was testing the CAN B bus, which I had an issue with, is if you look here, when they talk about bus versus leader on, basically they give you a very small range here. But this was if you would be testing with a meter, so it's pretty close to basically the recessive like idle voltage, and then the little pulses aren't going to change the meter much, and that's what kind of threw us off initially. And then the other weird thing too is if you look, the CAN high kind of rests close to 0, and then the CAN low kind of rests high. It's kind of a little bit weird for us. So this is the data we got at the CAN B right at the front control module, high and low. Blue would be high and the red would be the low. And if you zoom in, you can kind of see there's a lot of different issues with the data. And then, I'm going to move this one window so I can. And if you look, our voltages, we were kind of resting at like 0 volts and then pulsing close to 4 on the CAN high. And then the CAN low was kind of like resting around 5. But it wasn't pulling all the way ground, and the data was just looking, it doesn't look very nice. So what we did is, here's the thing that I wanted to talk about here is one of the things, Scott Brown on Diag.net, we were having a conversation kind of last year at Vision about how, basically pattern failures are starting to become a thing of the past. Because when you have complex, especially network issues, there's so many different, variables involved, And this vehicle does have about like 7 different pattern failures that could cause basically the same issue. There's multiple areas that it's common for wires to break. There's multiple modules that are known to fail and bring down the network. I thought it was going to be a slam dunk at first because the A-pillar had like watermarks going down it. And, I was like, sweet, I'm done. I just got to find the corroded connector at the bottom of the kick panel. And that wasn't the case here. There's ignition switch failure faults that are known on these. So it really just kind of, reinforces the need for, good testing strategy and techniques. And so what we did, I just threw the diagram up. Actually, I don't really like Mitchell diagrams too much, but I do like them sometimes with network issues for a couple reasons. They show you where the module is, and then they also kind of, put it all on a couple pages a little bit easier when I'm doing kind of module stuff. But this is where we're testing right here. We're at the FCM CAN-B bus. This is where we were probed for the testing there. And so basically the strategy we had is we literally went around and unplugged every single module on this bus and really didn't get any improvement on the data. It still looked like this no matter what. And then Pedro's going to show you another one, or talk about another one where we kind of didn't do that. I was going around, I didn't really unplug all the modules and stuff, and I kind of made a bad call on that one because it just seems so much like this vehicle here. So we're kind of changing our strategy for testing some of this. So when I unplug the front control module, so basically I am, basically unplugged right here, this connector. So now the only modules that would be, basically isolated the front control module, and all the modules on the bus would just be the rest of the CAN-B ones, and then the voltages. It looks better. It looks like better communications. And luckily Pedro, his wife, and he was very nice to me. This is another reason you need to have good friends in the industry. So you can phone a friend, and he went and scoped his wife's car to check the voltages because that chart didn't make too much sense on the Chrysler side. And then I kind of, when I was going back later, read it was because they were talking about multimeter testing with it, and you could see that the resting voltage CAN high is closer to the 5, and it pulses close down to like 1 volt, and then the CAN low is rest to 0 and pulses up to about 4. And so that's basically what we ended up having when a front control module got unplugged. So we called the front control module on that one, and then Pedro, you did confirm that's what fixed it, right?
Yes, they actually, I believe they were going for a used part, and they got a fuse box without a front control module. So they panicked a little bit. And once they reassessed what they were doing, they realized that they had to replace the front control module is actually the solid state device that is the gateway, not the fuse box itself.
Yeah, because I think they still call it TIPM, or they call it the front fuse box. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that right now.
So when it's separate, a separate unit on the fuse box, it's a front control module. When it's part of the fuse box, it's a totally integrated power module.
Okay.
So it looks like it's a front control module in this case.
Yeah, it was a separate module that would bolt up to the fuse box. So.
No, and that was that can be very confusing when you're looking at these charts and they're not really explaining very well how these measurements were taken, and you compare it to what maybe engineering had put together in that chart versus real world. It's not always going to match up, and it takes a lot of dedication to collect known goods and work together, networking. As Matt was saying, that was his main point to this, that he's faced with a problem, but he's able to network and talk to somebody that can have a similar vehicle or had something in their database, and they can share it and find a solution on the spot.
It would be nice to get the manufacturer to learn that using a multimeter for network diagnosis is not an adequate tool.
Yeah, I deal with that on the daily basis. Not even kidding. That people want to check CAN voltages with a multimeter. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
No,
that's
we're not going to do that.
That's the frustration as technicians start to use oscilloscopes and start to see the value in dynamic testing. But when they're first getting into it, it can be frustrating because service information does not help you do that. That's why, as Pedro said, you have to befriend and be part of conversations and befriend people. That way you can, because it takes friends in this industry to kind of get through some of these struggles. So.
Well, and then even as manufacturers start to finally adopt the use of oscilloscopes, like when you're looking at like the OE level of like how they're going to integrate tests and stuff, like it really has to be proven to them that it's either going to drastically reduce the diagnostic time, which to be honest with you, they usually don't care too much anyways because of the flat rate system, or that it's basically going to do something else, something that you could never physically have done without a scope. And I think there might be some disagreement there, from people like us who are believers in scopes versus like, a service engineer. And so I don't see network diagnostics really becoming something that we're going to see always use the scopes for. I think right now it seems like GM's using it a lot for like maybe, cam timing and stuff, but I haven't really seen or heard too much of them talking about moving towards network diagnostics. And I got one more, I just want to show you one more picture of another vehicle. And then Pedro will go back to the other one and our learning, how we learn from one that didn't turn out as good as this one. But this is this is off of a Freightliner. This is an over-the-road tractor trailer truck, so I know you guys aren't all crazy like me and like to do the diesel stuff, but this vehicle right here, I got called to a shop, and basically a customer came to them and he just wanted a second opinion because he went to the Freightliner dealer and they told him that he needed the entire after treatment system replaced because it's like a one box unit. And so it comes with like the SCR, the DOC, all this stuff. They said that the DOC wasn't working correctly. So I thought, and of course they're gonna do every sensor and everything that breaks along the way. He was quoted $19,000 for the repair for labor and parts. And so he just wanted to get a second opinion. And so I thought I was going to be at the shop for an hour, run a regen, confirm that the DOC wasn't lighting off. It ended up, I just saw a lot of different erratic data PIDs and stuff that were changing a lot. And I'm starting to realize, I'm like, I don't think this thing has an after treatment issue. And basically what was happening is there's an engine controller. There's a body controller for the truck because it's got a Detroit diesel engine, Freightliner truck, and then a Detroit after treatment module. And basically the body module is kind of like I don't know if it's really a gateway, but that's kind of where the data gets exchanged. And so this was an accident mitigation module. This is like a radar unit module that was on the truck. And I'm not gonna lie, I had 16 hours in this truck, but I finally found basically this one module was sending out random corrupt data packets, and it was screwing up the data that was being exchanged between them. And so it was actually coding, the vehicle was actually coding, I believe, let me see, I haven't put this on a PowerPoint. This vehicle was coding for NOx conversion efficiency low. And it was just because of the bad data. It would be like having like skewed oxygen sensor data and throwing a cat code or something. And so just because of the weird temperature data and stuff, this module was creating that issue. And so they would have put that $19,000 repair onto the vehicle, and it still would not have been fixed. So now this is the only time you can get away where a person is excited to pay 16 hours of labor for diagnostics because it was much cheaper than the $19,000 after treatment system. But it just goes to show, like, the kind of stuff we're seeing now. It's just it's not pattern failure stuff. It's just weird failures that take time to properly diagnose. And so we need to maybe, the industry needs to make sure to shift to kind of really sell proper diagnostics and, let the customer know, hey, we're going to take the time to do it right, but it's going to save you money in the long run because you're not going to get a bunch of parts you don't need. Because, doing mobile stuff, it's disgusting sometimes when you get to a shop how many parts have been put on this vehicle. So.
Yeah, and you said it key. Like, we have to learn how to sell. We have to learn how to value the testing and learn how to sell it at the counter. as an industry, we are terrible at that.
They probably needed all that stuff anyways.
What did you end up doing to this? I don't know. Did you say what you ended up?
For that truck, it was one bad module. It was just a radar module for like accident mitigation, and so I unplugged the module and everything was good except it was coding for the module, and so they were going to recommend a module. The shop was going to put a module in it.
I had one the other day where it was a CAN high speed issue, and when you unplugged the TCM, the signal looked perfect, but every single time you plugged the TCM, the data looked crazy. And it was simply a missing power to the TCM. The shop already replaced the TCM, and they called me out when they plugged the new TCM in and found that the data was still goofy and there was no scan tool communication.
What kind of vehicle?
It was, I think I talked to you about this maybe, but it was Infinity. It's like the equivalent of a Maxima, but it was older.
Okay.
I think Keith and I talked about it too. It was like a 02.
Yeah, that's the i30. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it uses K-line from DLC to PCM, and then PCM on the backside has high-speed communication between modules, but all of your communication to it is through the K-line.
So it was RxTX actually from scan tool to the TCM.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Scan tool to TCM was RxTX.
ECM and TCM had CAN, or the only CAN was between the two. But anyways, he was scoping the CAN at the TCM because he had no comm with the TCM. And the CAN bus looked crazy, and it would clean up every time he unplugged it. So they replaced the TCM. He said he checked power and grounds, but I guess the wiring diagram he pulled didn't show the one. It wasn't the same as the one I had. But anyways, my point is the network waveform was terrible, and it was a blown fuse. I replaced a blown fuse when I got there, and the waveform was perfect because it was missing a power and ground. It screwed up the CAN bus that much. So keep that in mind. I think the unplugging module stuff can get dangerous, and that's why you're going to hear about my mistake and a learning experience here from Pedro, because he had to go and clean up after me. Yeah, and I'll set the stage real quick. I mean, I'm probably not the only one. You attend, and not to beat up any training, but some of the older network classes, that was what they taught basically. I mean, a lot of us technicians were taught to unplug modules until the waveform cleaned up. Just be careful, and that sets the stage for yours. I look forward to hearing about it.
All right. So I kept looking away from the screen, not to be rude, but I was trying to find some scope files from this 2015 Town and Country, and I actually cannot find them. So I do apologize, but I will do my very best to talk you guys through everything.
I might have one, so let me see if I can find it while you're talking.
Okay, cool. So we get a call from a shop. A guy says, "Hey, listen, I have this Town and Country, and the wipers are going crazy. The dash is lighting up, coming off and on. The vehicle starts and runs, but they've been dealing with this for a couple of weeks." He says, "I suspect I have a bad tip them. I would like for you guys to check it before we actually make the repair." So fair enough. We go out there. We start looking at all the, like by the hinges where you have the wire that can break by the sliding doors, the tailgate, the basics that you've seen. We don't see anything there. Make the call on the tip them, tell them to get it replaced. Calls us back, "Hey, listen, the wipers are still going crazy. Everything's pretty much the same." So I go, I think 2 days after he calls me, I can make it over there. And I start looking over the network. I'm scoping it, and I can see very erratic where you have your typical CAN where it could, let's say, 2.5 to 1.5 on the low, but it had like patterns writing on top of it. There was like from 2.5 to 5. All right, perfect. There we go. That's a good one right there. So when I was talking to Matt,
don't make fun of my notes. I gotta get rid of my notes. I'm not good at taking notes sometimes on the fly.
No, don't worry about that.
None of us.
And then so I'm talking to Matt on the phone about this one, and he mentions that as soon as he unplugs the tip-om, the problem goes away. And it made sense. We're removing what we suspected to be a failed component to be affecting the network. The problem is when you have a gateway like the tip-om on a Chrysler, that actually feeds power to a lot of modules as well. So you have to consider what you're doing when you're unplugging the fuse box, you're turning off a lot of modules. So if you don't have a hard electrical fault or more of a logic issue or something with a solid state module that can only corrupt your network when it's powered on, you kind of put a band-aid over the problem and tricked yourself into something that's not really there. And that's what it came out to be. Once they put it on and we scoped it, my captures looked identical to Matt's here. And if you want to stop sharing your screen, Matt, I want to share a wiring diagram that I was fishing around earlier.
I got the one, just to show, this is once I unplugged the module.
Oh, good.
And it was just like, I just did that other Jeep the week before, so I thought it was like slam dunk, same thing. Because we went from, that kind of stuff to the proper voltages and clean pulses and stuff. But obviously that didn't work out. So instead of unplugging, we're gonna go to wire clipper mode now.
Now I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Now, did that kind of teach you? Would you change your diagnostic strategy to don't start with a tip on, but maybe make that the last module?
Well, I have a weird way of approaching these problems, so I don't know if I could say it like that. But basically, it might be frowned upon in our industry. I try to do the best electrical repairs that I can. If I find myself that I'm dealing with a splice network that has no way of opening up and separating modules, I will actually cut splices to isolate it, because that's the most effective way that's within my reach. So that being said, let me share my screen here. I'm trying to figure out.
See, if I could go back in time, before I condemn the tip-em, I would just clip the wires of the tip-em. I would have had piercing probes a little bit further down, and then if it didn't clean up, then I would know.
Can you guys see
the
my
other
screen?
thing too,
Okay, go ahead, Matt.
Well, I think the other thing too that people need to remember too, a lot of times is that we're also told not just unplugging modules, but if you have a module it's hard to get to, and you see this a lot like on Identifix or other things, start unplugging fuses to modules. Well, a module could still take down a network without power to it. I mean, you could just have electrical issues inside the module, so there's still a concern there as well, I think.
Very true.
Yep.
And that turned out to be the problem we were dealing with. We actually, so just to get back on track, I'm trying to remember where I left off. So I came back, and that's the very first thing I did. I actually opened up the circuit at the tip-em, because I remember what Matt had told me. He said as soon as I unplug the tip-em, the problem goes away. So I get in there, and the problem we're dealing with, if you guys can see my mouse cursor here, we're dealing with an IHS problem, which is an interior CAN bus dedicated to a lot of interior components. I get to the tip-em, and I clip this, and I clip this. Can you guys see that all right?
Needs to be zoomed in, probably.
Okay, I'm trying to maneuver this window here. Give me 1 second.
I think, by the way, we're like 1 or 2 model years short of having a star connector.
Yeah, exactly. We almost made it in time. Is that better?
Here you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so I clip these guys here and here and completely isolate it, and I still see a very dirty waveform similar to the one that Matt just shared. So at this point, I have just established that I actually have a problem with the rest of the vehicle, not in the tip-em, and it kind of supported my suspicion that when he had unplugged the tip-em, he had shut down a lot of different modules.
Yep.
So
Good
now
point.
here's my starting point. What was it?
I said that's an awesome point.
Yeah, and it, we were kind of just developing this as we went along. We were talking on the phone about this, and I had recently read an article of a friend of mine, I hope I can call him that he had found some issues by the hinges, by the door jamb. So even though Matt looked at this, I went ahead and looked at it again, and I didn't have any issues by the driver's door. So I actually opened up the circuit here as well, inside of the door panel. I didn't want to do it by any flexing points. And the module still powered on, my driver's door module, and the signal looks fine. So I'm like, okay. So I go ahead and grab the white and gray and the white and orange, and I jump it straight to the tip-em, and I remove all of this where I'm waiting. So none of the vehicle is going to be involved, only the driver's door module and the tip-em. And I have good communication.
Basically, two module network, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So we just altered the network, and we just verified something that I think is a good plan of attack. When we suspect the gateway has failed and we want to make sure it's not another module, let's remove or let's add a suspected good module and hook it up straight to our gateway. And if we can establish communication and our CAN signal cleans up, we know that our gateway is fine and we have to chase the rest of the vehicle. If you have a problem where you're not communicating with any of the interior bus and you do this and you still can talk to it, and maybe you try the passenger side door module and you still have the same issue, you're building up a case already against that gateway. And as soon as I did this, then I knew I was dealing with a problem with the rest of the vehicle. And my obstacle here, I'm going to move my screen around. The obstacle I have here is that there is really no splices anywhere. I mean, no combs or anything like that. Everything is just spliced. It's from one splice to the other. And under the driver's seat, I'm trying to see if I can find that splice point that I was dealing with, but I'm probably not going to be able to tell you exactly where it is. I found a splice, a big one, that fed a lot of the rear modules, the seat modules, and some stuff in the instrument panel. And I cut it, and I got my network back. So let's see if I had, let's see here. For example, if we pay attention here, where I have this splice, and I was using a different type of wiring diagram that was a little more specific on this, I actually was able to identify about 6 suspect modules that were involved in that splice because it would break away. And once I did that and looked a little further, we found that our, let me see if I can see the modules here, our blind spot sensors were the problem in the rear. I actually did not get to identify if it was the right or the left because they both share a connector. I think it's 851, correct? Yeah, 851 and 850. And as soon as we eliminated the blind spot modules, everything came back and everybody was happy. The wipers started working as expected. We had communication with everybody. And the shop had actually had to pull off the bumper cover in the rear to gain access to these and just unplug, one at a time and see exactly what happened. And I still have to follow up with them. And one of the interesting things that we found from this approach was that I think we're going to continue to do this approach on these type of vehicles that have a gateway like this. If it shows that the whole network is shut down and you cannot talk to anybody on there, this quick step can help you identify, do I have a gateway problem or a problem in the vehicle with the wiring or a module that's causing this?
Wow.
Yeah.
What a mess of wiring. That's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminded me of the old Class 2s that didn't have the splice packs. They were just kind of daisy chained.
Yeah, the early 90s and stuff like the vans, none of those had combs. They were horrible.
No, they were terrible. And
I did a this vintage era town and country before where I had a similar issue. Wipers were going crazy. And initially I almost called it as part of the wiring, needed to track down part of the wiring harness because in the B pillar I was able to kind of pull on some of the connections inside the right behind the rear door, the B pillar there. And it actually ended up being the overhead DVD screen. That was killed. But as you open and close it, I actually used the Chrysler J-Box app as the diagnostic tool because it gave me the topology. So the moment I would see that module drop out, my windshield wipers would start coming on and freaking out. And that would be the only module that would go red on it and lose communication or would completely drop off the network. So I kind of used the J-Box app as a diagnostic tool in that one. And I have since used that for that because, I mean, $25 for a day's worth of access, it was worth it to have a live network topology that was color coded to see what networks would drop.
That's a good point. Excellent. Not everybody's able.
Yeah, not everybody has a micropod laying around.
Andrew had a question. He says, was there any indicators on the mirrors for the blind spot detection?
They were not illuminated. When he's talking about the LED on the mirror that warns you that you have somebody there.
Yeah.
No, there was no activity from there, and I believe the blind spot modules would have to have activity in the network to inform the TIPM to turn that on. They don't have a direct connection to those lights.
Okay.
A crazy one.
So it's
Speaking of Class 2, I got one more thing I'll show really quick if you guys don't mind. Speaking of Class 2.
Please.
It's all you.
We did this one the other day, and this was a Class 2. If you look at the voltage, the resting voltage was 3.5 volts. And I guess this is one more reason I want to talk about pattern failures because I'm not going to lie. There's a huge pattern failure. I've done a bunch on them. This is a G van. This is like a G3500. And there is like a frame. There's a frame to engine ground that goes bad on them all the time. I've done a bunch of them. And this thing was in pretty rough shape, and the cables didn't look that good. And I probably spent a good hour and a half trying to voltage drop and get it to act up. The issue was that when this thing was acting up, and it would lights would come on and off, or the gauges would start going crazy. And when all this was happening, I didn't know if it's because I flexed this cable the right way and stuff. So I'm trying to get it to happen often enough. And so again, I got kind of beat up on the pattern failure, and finally I decided to actually go to the comb. And do you guys have the AES Wave tool now, like the
you isolate?
Yeah, a couple of us do.
Yeah. So I love that tool. I plugged that in the comb. I just started polying, and as soon as I unplugged the ABS module, the data returned to normal. And I went and the ABS connector itself had a bunch of corrosion in it, and it was basically allowing voltage. It was allowing voltage from the power feed to the module to get onto the Class 2 network. So it was,
I probably see
the ABS modules underneath the van.
1 to 3 of those a month, and I'm in the South.
Hey,
With ABS module corrosion.
Pedro, you remember the one I had, the cutaway, the U-Haul?
Yeah, that was a background, right?
No, that
With
was
the floor?
Yep, that one. That one was
Okay.
a weird one.
I remember that. You were driving that for a while, right?
That was ended up being part of the wiring for the box was rubbing and was taking out my lights, but that short was actually grounding my modules.
I remember now that you're mentioning that because you were driving that thing late at night, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would hit like a speed bump, and when the cab would flex, my lights would go off and my gauges start going crazy. And I would start setting Class 2 codes. But then when I fixed the short, when I found it, the car wouldn't start.
And why wouldn't it start? I don't remember what happened.
The ground from the battery to the body was no good.
Okay.
Oh.
It looks like it was in the hit and it was painted over, and I guess over time
So once you tried to use it, it was no good.
Yep.
It had Chicago style corrosion.
Yeah, there you go. And
We have lots of Chicago
there you go. I like your hat.
into there.
If we have time, there's one I was putting together before we got on the chat that I thought was quite amusing.
If you're ready, go for it.
All right, let's
I
see.
can always do mine another day if we get too long.
It's
That's up
going to
the
be
viewers.
pretty quick, so I hope it works out for us. Let's see.
Okay.
Is that good right there?
Yeah, you're good.
There you go.
Okay. So I got called into a shop, 05 Chrysler 300, kept it going into lit mode, throttle would go dead. And it kept setting the same code here, the P1628, which pretty much is defined as the 5-volt reference 2 is erratic. After a couple minutes of idling or driving, it would enter lit mode and no throttle. It's got a new pedal, PCM, throttle body. I was called in to reprogram the PCM. Once we reprogrammed it, started the car, start cleaning up my stuff. You can hear the beeping on the dash, and it had the little thunderbolt indicating that there was a problem with the throttle. So after that, I was asked to diagnose it. I start looking at this definition, and it's pretty much explaining that the auxiliary 5-volt supply voltage is varying too much or too quickly. And these are the possible causes here. So looking at a wiring diagram, we can see that the PCM shares that 5-volt supply with a couple different things. We have the map sensor, APP, cam sensors, and actually one cam sensor and EGR. So right away I go after the EGR and plug it, still having the same condition. It starts acting up again. So then I grab the scope. There's some scan data I was pulling up. In my mind, if I'm having a problem with the 5 volts, especially if it's shared by the map sensor here, I should be able to see something. I'm trying to find if I have a laser pointer. There we go. I never had any erratic behaviors with any of my PIDs. I'm not going to spend too much time on the scan data because all of this looked good. So I snapped the throttle a couple times. I kept watching it. Then I decided to grab the scope and I hook it up to the 5-volt line.
Good God.
And I don't like this. You know, I know I'm using my snap-on, but this is, and I actually don't have peak detect on. I'm pretty sure I didn't. So
Imagine
the
if you did.
spacing, What's up?
Imagine if you did.
Yeah, exactly. So at this point, they look like the car's idling, nobody's disturbing the throttle, and it looks like they're equally spaced apart, right? Like the same event is happening over and over, and that's pretty interesting. And to me, as I start zooming in, it reminds me of the end of an ignition pattern.
Yep.
So then
it looks like secondary bleed.
Yeah, definitely. So I hook up to a coil, coincidentally, number one, driver's side front. And coincidentally, it's kind of lining up to where I'm having the highest peak. It's a waste spark design. As I start getting closer here, we can see that every time I have that excessive ignition noise in my 5-volt line, it matches up with ignition coil number one. I didn't take a picture of it, but that coil was cracked. In one test that I did very quickly, I unplugged the coil and probably had the car running and driving for close to 45 minutes, and the car never acted up again. At that point, we opted to replace the coil and replace the spark plugs, which were mix and match. They were different brands, and a couple of them, I don't think they've ever been done. I'm not sure if you guys can relate, but there's a lot of issues on these Hemi. If you use the wrong spark plugs, they can actually interrupt the ASD relay, and the car will intermittently turn off with no codes.
Yeah.
So it's very important to pay attention to ignition noise on these Hemis. This is just a picture of the firing order when I was trying to identify exactly what I was dealing with here. And this is a close-up.
Wow.
So
yeah.
We got to about, it's a 5-volt line. It would see 14 volts and then well below -2.
You can see where it all went.
So that's that.
Interesting how it cleans up during the end of the dwell period.
Yeah, exactly. Very well timed.
That's where all the juice went.
Oh, that's a cool one. Cool.
All right, so I think
every time I see one of those, I always concern myself with, am I picking up the noise during my acquisition?
Yeah.
That's something I think maybe you should watch out for with, if you see this in a pattern, don't rabbit trail off. Maybe try to acquire that voltage at a different point. Make sure your cables aren't close to that secondary ignition source or any winding, or because you could just be seeing that during acquisition. It may not actually be affecting the circuit.
No, that's a good point, and that's why in the beginning I had said I was using my snap-on scope, because if you use your snap-on scope a lot, you'll notice if you're getting like a primary signal on one channel and watching something else on a different channel, they might bleed over a little bit, and it can be confusing. And the way I performed an experiment to make sure that I wasn't chasing my tail is I unplugged the coil I had identified that would match up with the problem I was having. Because if I could have never gotten it to change, and maybe if I see that specific event and I unplug the coil that correlates with, and I'm still having an issue, I don't think I would have chased that right away. To anybody listening, to kind of keep that in mind, it's always take it with a grain of salt. You just take in mental notes and keep developing a case. And you want to prove things more than one way. And that's how we did it, by unplugging the coil.
Very cool.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Right.
Very cool. You guys have something coming up in April. I'd love for you guys to fill everybody in on. Yeah.
Definitely. Our good friend Andy Fisher has invited us to do a class at Lake Central High School in Indiana, and we're going to be holding a hands-on snap-on scope class, snap-on tool class, where it's going to be very focused on kind of doing what I was talking about, how you might have like voltage bleeding over right from one channel to the other, and it's going to be totally focused around snap-on. We find that it's one of the most shops own a snap-on product, a large one that might have a scope to the back of it, and they've never touched the leads.
Yeah, I do.
The leads are still in the bag with the little zip ties on them. They don't even know they have a scope.
I can't even tell you how many times during every day I ask people if they have a scope, and they go no. I was like, well, you got like a Varus or like a Zeus, and like, yeah, I was like, you have a scope.
Yeah, it's a powerful scope. I that is my go-to tool. Every time I go somewhere, that's what I grab. That's what I start with. There might be some disadvantages to something that's PC based, but it's a powerful tool nonetheless, and it gets me by.
Still my go-to.
Yeah, so we want to share that. Me and Matt have been working on collecting some case studies and just trying to have a methodical approach on teaching people how to use their scopes and take advantage of them. and I don't have the date in front of me. Do you have the date, Matt, of when we're holding that class? It's April 13th.
That's the one thing we didn't prepare here, huh? I'll pull it up on the calendar.
April 13th. So anybody that's interested, definitely shoot us a message or an email. Tommy, I got you on there already. You're the first sign up we have. And definitely it'll be something to grow on.
Oh, sorry. I thought it was music.
Did you want to?
We're hoping it fills up, and we're gonna add more dates too. We're gonna try to do it kind of. We're gonna start in Indiana. We're gonna try to do a couple of places in Chicagoland area too. So, cool. And who knows? Maybe we'll travel the world.
If you want to sign up, just send us a message on our Training by Tech's Facebook page, and then we can refer you to them to get signed up.
Or
appreciate it.
We can probably put the date and some of the details on the website too, right?
Yeah, I can
put the contact info on our.
You guys have a price in mind?
I think Matt, you had some ideas on that. It's going to be close to probably about 150. We were talking about for an 8-hour hands-on class. It would include lunch.
And we're keeping it small. There's only going to be 18 people, and there's going to be 2 of us. So I think it's a good value because we're going to keep the group sizes just to like 3 people, and we'll be able to have a lot more one-on-one time with the students. So.
And is that 400 for Tommy?
600.
600 for Tommy. 600, okay.
Wow.
Yeah, he's gonna be a pain in our ass, so we gotta make sure to make it worth the while.
You guys like
yes,
that?
He will.
Like that Midwest isn't already saturated with good training. Bring that stuff down here.
Florida smells like swamp.
It does. It smells like worms almost all the time. But we have Disney World.
Yeah, but it smells like a swamp.
Stand by my previous statement.
Do you guys want to see one more quick waveform?
Sure.
Please. Another crazy.
You know the answer. You know the answer to that.
Yeah, we will all hang around for the next 2 hours.
Is it Pedro getting greasy? I mean, that's what we really want to see.
Oh,
you gotta catch a picture the next time.
I had to throw that shirt out. So.
I've been trying to get Pedro to work on trucks, and he doesn't. You know, I was telling you guys last night. He doesn't. He didn't know about the steering shafts, how they get greased and stuff, and I thought he was gonna be very upset. And that's why he sends me and said, "I'm covered in gas right now and stuff. I've got gas all over me and everything like that." And that's what Pedro sends me in for the old cars and the gasoline ones and all the greasy ones. You know?
It's for the experience.
Payback. He's the brains. I'm just a flashlight holder and the mechanic guy. Pedro. He's the brains of the operation.
Matt loves smelling like diesel. I mean, instead of smelling like gas for a whole 20 minutes.
He's just feeling out of place.
Like
that's why I'm doing him a favor. So.
It did
so
work.
I'm not gonna lie.
What is it?
This vehicle here, I had a lot of time in this one. This is an international ambulance, so it was the Village of Bloomingdale in Illinois, their ambulance, and the AC would stop working, and this thing had a bunch of AC parts on it and stuff. So basically, there's a strategy. It's got a transducer, not a high side switch, and so basically, I forgot what the pressure was, but if you hit like 400 psi or something like that, they basically stop control to the compressor until the next key cycle. So that's why the AC would stop working. And so I was scoping. Now this is me getting a little bit crazier, but I was scoping the signal going to the body computer, and every time, I had a guy drive me around. I'm on the laptop. I'm trying to get this thing to act up. It was coding for that high side pressure. I'm trying to see if I had a sensor. My expectation was that maybe the transducer was shorting high or something like that. And so every time we would turn on the test drive, I would see this like voltage spike here. And so I was like, oh, maybe like when we turn or something like that, the wires are getting pulled on the transducer or something. But then I noticed that it wasn't the actual turn, it was the turn signal, because whenever the turn signal would get turned on, you'd see this, and whenever the turn signal would shut off, you'd see this. And it got to the point where this was just me like in the bay, just messing around with the turn signal. It would just, I could repeat it all day long. And so I think eventually it would get bad enough where the voltages, the BCM would kind of think that that was super high pressure because it was getting close. It was getting above that 4 volts for the sensor, and so this one turned out, and this one was 14-hour jobs. And I'd like to talk to anyone who thinks they couldn't do that without a scope, figure that out. Because what it ended up being was, it was like kind of a splice pack comb for ground, and there was corrosion inside of it, and so it was just kind of, there was a couple different signals on the body computer that didn't have that good of a ground, and it was backfeeding voltage into that sensor circuit there. So it was basically, it was easier to go try to get a ground through the BCM than through, the splice comb to actual ground. And so between the diagnosis and repair there, it was like 14 hours. So it was a tough one.
Yeah.
It's a good thing.
And it was a very greasy job, Pedro, it was a very greasy job to fix it, Pedro, and you have to pull a truck guy's size starter out on your back to get to the stuff. So,
yeah, I think I would have been done at that point.
Yeah.
Or called Matt, one of the two.
So I think we have one more case study, right?
Yeah, Brian.
Yep.
Before we introduce the case study, let's introduce the guy who's doing the case study. Here, hold on just 1 second, everybody, if you have it. Oh, Jesus.
I really want to make you not share.
Hold on.
Come on, Chris.
It never gets old.
It's funny that you.
It just has that like readily available. I got 1,600 views on it.
All right, hold on.
Every time Chris is down, he just fires this video.
I do. It makes my day.
Does he fire it right up?
Those
right.
1,600 views, about 1,400 are Chris.
All right, hold on. Now, everybody, I'm going to present Brian Culata, the man behind the fire, with his case study. Here you go, Brian. Take it away.
Alrighty.
Don't worry, Brian. I used to have to keep a CO2 extinguisher on my cart, so.
All right. Make sure this is set up right. I have a
Wait, do your stretches first.
stretch. No stretches.
Hey, look, you gotta put on the mask too.
I got a 2004 Chrysler Concorde 2.7 liter.
Jeez, what are you?
SS supercharged GTI
LTZ.
LTZ V71 race car. Anyways, the customer concerned, he just purchased the car, and he needs to pass emissions in order to get his license plates. In Ohio, in 14 counties out of the 87 counties in Ohio, you have to pass emissions to get your plates.
Because Ohio.
Yeah, not the whole state, just 14 of 87 counties. So we need to pass emissions, and he said his check engine light comes on and it goes off. I did a code scan first, and when attempting to self-ID the vehicle, the process failed. The vehicle was built manually into the scan tool, and I retried to have communication, and that also failed. I tried a different scan tool, same thing. And I attempted to scan the vehicle on the generic global side, and that worked. And I came up with a PO172 fuel system 2 rich. So, the backstory. There's always a backstory, because there's always something that they don't tell you. The customer just purchased the vehicle. He said that there has been previous work done in attempt to fix some unknown issue. He couldn't come up with any kind of answer for me. The vehicle was brought to me at operating temperature, and he wanted to wait for me to test this thing out. It was later in the evening, and we were about to close. It was, about 4 o'clock. So I did a brief visual inspection. I found a new crank sensor, a new cam sensor, a new throttle position sensor, 3 ignition coils. It had 6 new plugs, an idle air control motor, a new map sensor, and both upstream oxygen sensors were new. So quite a bit of things that are responsible for making the thing run well have all been replaced. Pretty much everything. So scan data was analyzed. Remember, I'm only able to communicate on the global side, so I don't have enhanced data. Short-term fuel trim and long-term fuel trim, they weren't screaming rich like the code says, and I tried in multiple RPMs, multiple loads in the bay, and I only got a total correction of approximately -7 to -10. So it's not perfect, but it's not an alarming number. It's not a number that would cause a code. So I performed a test drive, and I got the same results. The customer, again, he was waiting in the lobby. He was getting impatient, and we were approaching closing time. He asked if he can bring back the car in a couple days, later on in the week. 2 weeks goes by. The customer finally returns. He had gone to AutoZone and had them scan the vehicle 2 days prior to bringing it to me, and they decided to clear the codes for him. So, thanks, AutoZone. I pulled the vehicle back in. I retry enhanced data. Still,
I thought they weren't allowed to do that anymore.
I guess they are.
He got into the zone, people. Come on.
They are not. They are not allowed to by policy, but they do it anyways.
Well,
It depends what store you go to.
Exactly.
So,
Sorry.
no problem. I pull the vehicle back in. I retry the enhanced data. Still, there's no communication. I'm able to communicate with all modules on the vehicle without any issues, other than the enhanced side of the PCM. All the other modules are on board. This vehicle has a PCI bus, which is shared among most of the modules, and an SCI bus, which is strictly between the PCM and the data link connector. Here's a brief clip of the wiring diagram. You can see in pink or violet is all of the networks shared on the PCI bus, and then the SCI is just going straight to my data link connector here. So I decided to scope the networks just to see if there's something sticking out, something quick that I can maybe use to maybe restore the communication on the enhanced side.
Did you mean to show us that diagram?
Yeah.
I didn't see it. Did everybody else see it?
It's on the YouTube.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh yeah. I'm sorry. If you guys on Zoom, that you guys won't see it.
All right.
Sorry. We suck.
Anyways, the generic data is limited to approximately 15 data PIDs. So again, I was trying to get the enhanced side to have more details to help me in diagnosis. I grabbed my my line SPI. You can purchase this from aeswave.com. I quickly grab a capture of the networks. This breakout box allows you to connect to the DLC, and then all 16 PIDs will be in this box. And there's LEDs that will blink when there's communication, and also there's a tail that will allow you to connect a scan tool at the same time, so you're not consuming the DLC completely. So I scoped the PCI and the SCI circuits. This waveform right here is 1 minute and 40 seconds. It's a very long time base for communications, but this was during an auto scan with the scan tool. You can see the networks, they're not shorted to ground, they're not shorted to battery. Neither network is shorted to each other. I decided at this point there's no quick easy fix for this, and I'm going to move on. This is just a capture of those networks zoomed in. You can see that it's fairly clean signal. There's no hard issue. Nothing is standing out in this capture right here. So the network is not entirely diagnosed at this time. Although limited, generic data can still be used to diagnose the vehicle. I performed a code scan after it was brought back to me, and instead of the rich code that I had, I now have a random misfire and a PO3L1 misfire. So cylinder 1 misfire. The rich code again is not present. The vehicle was started. It was left outside, and it was running very poorly. I smelled the exhaust, and it smelled really rich. The scan data was reviewed, and my trims were negative 25 on the short term and negative 25 on the long term, giving you a 50% total reduction in injector on time. I believe that's the maximum that this thing can adapt to. Bank 2, the opposite bank, had only minus 15 total correction, so much more emphasis on the Bank 1. The vehicle feels like it has a misfire. The trims are indicating it's most likely due to a ridge condition. I decided to begin my misfire diagnosis like I always do, and I start with a relative compression test. I had my my WPS transducer already out, so I did a relative compression test with vacuum, and this is a relatively quick test to perform, and it can guide you to the correct funnel before steering down the wrong path. So this capture right here in red is the relative compression battery voltage. There's nothing that is standing out to me. In blue is the vacuum trace as well. There's a little bit of rhythmic movement there, but it's subtle. And in green, of course, is the ignition trace, number 1. So this is zoomed in. You can see there's a little bit difference between cylinders 2, 5, and 6, but I don't see anything concrete here to move forward. So I decided to continue on. Knowing that this vehicle is rich, there's potential for cylinder wash, which could cause those couple cylinders to be slightly reduced in their effect to the battery voltage. But since it's running so rich, I decided to move forward. I believe that relative compression test is most likely just fine, and I moved on. The vehicle still has a misfire, yet I don't have this enhanced data to determine which cylinder is misfiring. So I decided to use my first look sensor in the tailpipe, and the reason why I did that is to help identify which cylinder might be misfiring. The first look sensor is a pressure transducer that reacts to change in pressure. If a cylinder is misfiring, that pulse that's in the exhaust will be affected during the exhaust stroke, and you can measure that at the tailpipe. And then if you add an ignition sync to that, you can determine which cylinders are misfiring. I used a piston position chart called TDC2, and you can buy that at drivabilityguys.com. Scott Schotten created that. It's an awesome piston position chart that makes the identification of the events that are happening in your capture much easier to find. So in this capture here, in yellow is my first look sensor, and in blue is my ignition number 1, and you can see I noted these cylinder 6, cylinders 2, and cylinders 4 have much lower pulses in them. They're not dead. It's not like a dead misfire, but they are contributing much less. So keep that in mind. Cylinders 2, 4, and 6, which is all on one bank, bank 2, are potentially showing misfires. So moving forward, I decide to scope the primary ignition of the ignition coils to help identify what's happening in the cylinder. When you scope ignition primary, you can usually get some good details in there, and it'll help you narrow it down. So I get my leads connected to the coils, and then the misfire is gone. The vehicle's running smooth. My trims are reflecting exactly what I had the first day I looked at this car, and I cannot get this vehicle to act up again. So I choose to come back to it about 2 hours later, and it still runs great. So now what? I know the vehicle has a few new coils, 6 spark plugs, and since the symptom I can't get it to act up anymore, I decide to remove the spark plugs to see maybe if the previous tech possibly cracked the porcelain or something. The plugs are fairly easy to get to on this car, so I decided to pull them out. I pull number 1 spark plug out. Remember, I had a PO301, so I'm going to pull number 1 first. Porcelain looks good. However, I noticed the number 1 spark plug gap was at approximately 10 thousandths. That's almost closed. The ground electrode was almost touching. The spec is approximately 50. So I know I have an ignition misfire. I know an ignition misfire does not typically cause trims to hit minus 50, but I do know this plug is not gapped correctly, and it will cause issues. Maybe not be an issue right now, but it's definitely an issue. So I decided to pull all 6 plugs and then check all of their gap. Fortunately, it was just number 1 that had a gap issue, but looking at the spark plugs, you can see cylinders 1, 3, and 5 are discolored. Mainly cylinders 3 and 5. Those 2 plugs right there are as black as can be. It's the end of the day, and I'll continue testing the next morning. The vehicle I left outside because I remembered the issue originally was when the car was outside cold. The next morning I start the vehicle, and again it's misfiring like crazy, smelling real rich. I decide to shut the vehicle off immediately, thinking the symptom may be temperature related. I go grab my scan tool out, I pull up data, start the vehicle again, I let it get into closed loop, and of course my trims are minus 50 again. I run the engine through all RPMs ranges, loaded and unloaded, and while I'm loading the engine with my foot on the brake and the selector in drive, I notice that as I'm power braking this, my brake pedal is rising. Like I'm watching my foot just climb and climb and climb and climb and climb. It's just kind of bizarre feeling. I decide to pinch off the brake booster in an attempt to isolate the problem. You know, my focus there was to pinch it off and to see if my trims would reflect any change. I go grab my pinch off tool and I come back and the vehicle is already running smooth again. So, shucks. I end up smoke testing the brake booster and I find that it is indeed leaking. Also, I noticed the brake booster check valve, it's stuck open. I can blow through it in both directions. It's restricted, and I noticed when you look inside of it, there's a bunch of leaves in it. I have no idea how leaves got into it, but there is literally leaves inside of this check valve. So I'm talking it over with my friend Brandon Steckler, and we come up with the conclusion that the brake booster leak could be leaning out the bank that the hose is connected to, which is bank 1, and then the map sensor would increase the increased manifold pressure would cause the map sensor voltage to change, and then the PCM would enrich the fuel mixture, subsequently causing the opposite bank to foul the spark plugs. To me, that sounded like a logical thought. However, I want to be able to prove this. I want to know that this is going to fix the car before I pull the trigger. Fortunately, it was really, really cold when this car was broken.
The live stream went dead, bro. Sorry. Something's going on.
What's that?
The live stream. Something's up with it.
Used to be working.
Not working here.
Restart your browser. Pull the trigger. Fortunately, it was really, really cold when this car was broken.
It's working, Tommy. It's gotta
The
restart
live
the
stream
browser.
went dead, bro. Sorry.
Okay. All right, no big deal. All right. So, anyways, it was really cold for us in Ohio last couple weeks, and fortunately, it was real easy for me to bring the car back outside, let it get cold, and then to get the symptom to happen again. And sure enough, I park it outside for an hour, hoping for it to run poorly, and it does. I had my vacuum hose pinchers ready to go in my hand. I pinch off that brake booster and nothing happens. There's no change at all to my fuel trims. So, slam dunk fail. Now what? I decided to get my scope leads hooked up to ignition, injectors, and I parked the vehicle back outside. Once it's cold, I'm going to reassess what's happening again. I get my scope hooked up to the ignition coil primary current and notice the coil ramps, they're not identical to one another. Again, this car had 3 of the 6 coils replaced. Here's a capture of that right here. You can see this coil. This is a new coil, number 1, and then this is the original OEM coil, number 3. The coil ramps are not identical. Remember, again, this had 3 new coils. They are, of course, aftermarket. There's nothing wrong with these coils. I wanted to point this out because if you see this, let me go back here. If you see this at any point when you're scoping an ignition coil and you see this ramp and then it plateaus like this, this isn't bad. This is an aftermarket coil that has more windings, and it's just the way it looks. This is a plateau here where it's called current limiting, where you're going to hit a certain point and then the amperage is going to just hold there until the ignition coil turns off, and then the coil essentially fires the spark. To prove this point, I measure the ramp up time of both coils. Because of the increased windings in that coil, this coil can hit its peak current much quicker. The new coil reached that peak current at 2 milliseconds, whereas the OEM was 3.1 milliseconds. So it's a much quicker ramp time, which is going to give the coil more of a robust feature to it, and in theory last longer. So just something to keep in mind if you're scoping ignition coil, especially if you have mismatched coils. They may not look identical. Depends on the feet.
Where were those coils from?
This coil was an NGK coil. There was one NGK. There was one Spectra, I think it was. Yeah, I think 2 of them are Spectra, some other manufacturer. But I know one was NGK. All 3 of the new ones looked identical.
Cool.
Moving on, there's one fuse that provides power to all 6 of the coils and all 6 injectors. So that's a great central location to grab the current from, to be able to see what's happening to 12 things at one time, essentially. So I grab my fuse loop. This is in this awesome kit that a lot of us have. You can get it from AES Wave. There's 3 different fuse loops in there, and also there's a little tail here so you can scope the voltage as well as clamping the loop with your low amp probe. So pretty cool thing. If you don't have one of those, get one of these. It's probably one of my favorite things that I got in my toolbox. Knowing that I had number 3 and number 5 spark plugs that were black, I decided to scope 3. This should say 5. 3 and 5 injectors as well to see their activity. I parked the vehicle outside for an hour, hoping to catch it running poorly, and I start the vehicle back up, and there it is, running bad. I grab my capture real quick. It is -5 degrees out that day. I immediately go back in the shop and I review what happened. And here's the capture that I got. I have these taller amp ramps right here are your ignition coils, and again you can see which ones are replaced. This one and this one. This is an OEM one. There's another new one here. But what we have here, the smaller ramps, are your injectors, and you'll notice that this one and this one are twice as high as the other ones. This one and this one happen to be cylinders 3 and 5. Cylinders 3 and 5 in voltage are right down here. You can see that both injectors are firing in tandem. They're firing together. So when cylinder 3 fires, 5 fires at the same time. And then when cylinder 5 fires, cylinder 3 fires at the same time. That's not good. Cylinders 3 and 5, that's the reason why this thing is running rich. And now we needed to determine why. Looking at, I just explained this. So what can cause the 2 injectors to actuate at the same time? Could it possibly be the transistors shorted in the PCM? Is the PCM possibly confused? Maybe the cam and crank correlation is not correct, and the PCM doesn't know exactly when to fire these injectors, so it's batch firing them. Maybe that's a possibility. Can the control circuits be shorted together? So I quickly rule out a confused PCM. I checked the cam and crank signals. I verified that they're not only clean, but they're timed correctly. And I compared them to a known good waveform that I had. Remember that the cam and crank sensors are new. However, new means never ever worked. You don't trust them unless you actually prove that they are good. The waveform matches my known good exactly. Nothing abnormal stands out in the capture, so I'm moving on. I was testing cam and crank at the PCM, so I decided that while I have that connector apart, let's do a continuity test between my cylinder number 3 injector and 5 injector control wires. Those two circuits should be completely isolated and not touching each other. So finally I find that those two circuits are shorted together. They're literally connected to each other, and that should not be. That's why this thing is broken. So I decided to touch base with the customer. I let them know what I found and what I need to do next. And what I need to do next is remove that upper intake plenum, because most of the wiring is underneath that plenum and I cannot access it without removing it to get to the loom to see what's going on. So he agrees to do that. I remove the intake plenum, and I find, let me do a little video here for you guys.
Is it a fire video?
No fire here. This is my voltmeter. It's in a continuity tester mode. You can hear it beeping. That means that those two circuits are connected. And then I'm using my AS wave terminal testers here, and I'm at the PCM connector, which is going straight to those injectors, which should be completely isolated. However, they're not. And then I get to right here. Camera focuses right there. You can see the insulation has broken, and those two control wires are basically touching each other. They're kind of crossed, and they're laying on top of each other. And then I take a pick here and I break that connection. You can hear it beeping in between me and my neighbor impacting. Right there.
Sounds like one of those hearing tests.
Yeah. Can you hear the short? So, oops. Moving on here. The wiring repair was documented. I did a digital inspection. I sent it to the customer. He was blown away. He's like, wow. You know, he was absolutely ecstatic about that. He loved the inspection. He thought that inspection was very valuable, and he could understand what's going on by the video that I was able to upload onto that inspection. So I did the wiring repair. Chrysler is happy again. The customer ends up calling back 2 weeks later, and he wanted to thank me. He said the vehicle is running amazing. Somehow this guy was amazed by the way a 2.7 liter Chrysler ran, which I find amazing myself. But
the fact that it did run?
Yeah. So to recap, the crank, cam, throttle, idle air control, map sensor, 3 coils, 6 plugs, 2 were fouled, brake booster leak, the failed brake booster check valve. All of that was not the cause of this problem. The customer, we informed the customer that he indeed had a leaking brake booster, and he couldn't afford that repair at this time. We did sell him a new brake booster check valve, so there was adequate vacuum held in the booster, but he was going to have the brake booster done at a later time. So that is my story.
Wow.
Very, very long diagnosis. I definitely lost my ass on this. Excuse my French, but it was definitely a learning curve. There were a few steps that I probably should have done differently. Probably should have stuck to my normal way of diagnosing, but I kind of steered off and then got lost, and then I was distracted by other things that were going on, like the leaking booster and a bad check valve and the spark plug that was almost closed. It's just a mess.
It happens to me too. Yeah, it's you go in saying, okay, I'm going to stick to my guns, stick to my process, and you get sidetracked, and then you kind of get screwed like that.
Yeah. So.
And by the way, Brian, that wasn't French. That was German. That was clearly German.
Oh, okay. that was donkey.
Scheiße.
Some people brought up a good point. Like in your case, you're fortunate enough that your team values what you do, so they stood their ground. They charged. You may not have made what you wanted to.
Yeah, we didn't charge him, 8 hours of diag, but we did charge.
And your boss,
and you got an attaboy.
And this client wanted this thing fixed. So
yeah, that's a real
right.
thing. A lot of times we'll get to the point we'll have it figured out, and then they're like, I don't have the money to fix that, and then that to me is so disheartening. You need that sense of accomplishment to go home and feel good.
I get that every day.
And your heart is just ripped out when they say no.
No, it sucks. Like sometimes I'll have a car and I'll tell JD, my service advisor, to sell testing, and in the meantime I'm actually testing the car because I just want to get that done so I can move on to the next one, because he does such a good job, I think, and as a company we do a good job of selling. Most of the time it's approved, but once in a while I'll invest an hour and they decline, and it's like I already know what's wrong with it. It's like such a bummer. That just happened on a 03 Trailblazer. Literally 4 coils failed. Now, mind you, this wasn't yesterday. I'm sure it wasn't a light switch, but the funny thing was 4 coils literally failed on a 4.2, and the 4 that failed were original. The other 2 were aftermarket, which is kind of interesting. But anyways, that was cool. Very good night. I think we should probably let everybody get to bed, is my thought. Release Pedro and Matt and everybody else.
And we'll announce the winner to the vision trip next week.
No more winners. I think we're tapped out.
The fourth and not final free trip.
I think.
Alrighty.
I think we're
spent.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I am
Thanks.
spent. I was up at 4 a.m. I got to be up again at 4 a.m. again tomorrow.
We chasing those rainbows, Tanner. I mean, it's what happened.
Yeah.
One day you're gonna get the pot.
Agreed.
One day.
Agreed.
You lay off your lucky charms.
Well, thank you, Pedro and Matt. Everybody, that's April 13th. Look up these guys, or give us a holler, and we'll point you in the right direction for that hands-on Snap-on class. And thank you, Brian, for your case study. Appreciate it.
Yep. And Vision's coming up, guys. So if you're not signed up, go sign up. And if you are, we'll see you there.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys very much.
Matt, you're muted. Something. Can't hear you. Oh, now you're.
Yes.
I was busy cursing.
Come see my heavy duty Pico class if you're interested in vision, So if you want to get into more of the heavy duty stuff, you're going to find that there's not many guys doing heavy duty stuff. And it's very similar. A lot of the stuff I do on cars is very similar to trucks. As you saw a couple of things tonight, network issues. Networks are networks, can is can. So
you were telling us the other day that the heavy duty side was much more, even more scarce for diagnostic technicians in the field. So that's an important thing. If you have any desire to do that kind of work.
Well, I mean, look at it. You got a $20,000 after treatment system. That customer was stoked to pay 16 hours of diag. Like we're not going to have gasoline customers stoked to pay 16 hours of diag. So there's definitely a market, a niche there. So check out Matt Shanahan's class. That'd be awesome.
And watch out for those greasy steering shafts, because those are bad.
Again, thanks you guys for great case studies. It was awesome night. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks a lot for having us.
All right.
He's back.
Pedro.
He's back.
Oh, yeah, I was here.
Pedro, when I go home, boss, I'm done for the day, I think, right?
I think we could end it here. You did good.
Let's get back to it.
Don't you have one more like 91 Mazda to work with?
I have to look at a 1995 truck tomorrow. I got to get my brick out of storage, you know, and so I can save.
Make sure to change that 9-volt.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right, guys.
All right.
Good night. Thanks for watching.
Good night.
Hey, guys.
Later, guys.
Later.
Peace out.